Hello again, Your Majesty. I see we are both taking the same route to the conference chamber. I must admit I did not anticipate seeing you again this way. Regardless, I hope your day has been pleasant so far. You know you're playing the game wrong, right? You're meant to say, "Yes, Princess, my day has been delightful." And then you inquire on my day in return. In the game, you don't say the truth that your day has been awfully dull. Well, you are right. I already said you are an unconventional leader. How foolish of me to think you would act otherwise. Oh, my expression earlier. I was simply frustrated with some of the gentlemen in the Concilium. I came across Count Jaeger earlier, and he so very rudely suggested that my sister and I should keep our greedy Balian hands out of Drachenfrain business. So in return, I simply told him to keep his large Drachenfrain mouth from spewing filth where it was not asked for. It is fine, Your Majesty. You need not apologize for actions that are not yours. Besides, I have heard far worse before. It is actually more admirable that Count Jaeger had the backbone to say it to my face. A lot of nobles act fake to me, since I am the princessa. But when my back is turned, they'll say how they truly feel. In a strange way, it is refreshing to be hated publicly by the nobles here. Your Majesty, should you really be saying such things about your own noblemen? Well, don't let them hear you, lest they decide to revolt against you. You may have been to battle, but surely House Verling alone cannot face the 8 other houses if they united against you. That's what I thought. Well, we have arrived. No, Your Majesty. It would be discourteous of me to enter before you. You take precedence as you are the king. I am simply a guest. Oh, come now, Your Majesty. Are we really going to play this game? I insist. You go first. Fine, then. If you insist on being such a gentleman, then I will oblige you. Thank you, Your Majesty. Welcome to the meeting, Your Majesty. I am sure I speak for the entirety of the Concilium when we say we are honored to be graced with your presence this day. Wouldn't you agree, Count Vogel?
Why, yes, of course I do, Countess Althea, especially after His Majesty had an emergency to attend to at his familial home in Fernkit. Seeing as you are here with us today, I can assume everything went smoothly? Oh yes, I almost forgot. Her Highness is here as well. You would think that considering this meeting is primarily in your interests, you would have arrived much sooner.
My apologies, Count Vogel. We are not all lucky enough to have considerable amounts of time free from obligations like you do. When I ever return here in the future, I will be sure to set aside all of my other commitments to make sure I arrive first to any meeting we have. Please, let us all sit down and get straight to the topic at hand. If that is in the interest of His Majesty, that is. All right, then. I will take it upon myself to start the discussion, and then I will hand the floor to you, Your Highness. Is that acceptable? Of course it is, Countess. My thanks, Your Highness. Our lovely visit from Princess Althea de Reyes is for one primary reason. The Empress and Emperor of the Balian Empire has sent Her Highness to champion their collective interest in reinstating trade between our two nations, now that His Majesty has risen to the throne and begun the long process of changing many of the lingering policies left over by the late King's rule. Previously, our trade with the Empire was halted, since they started a war with our southeastern neighbors Kiraja and Matahari. Continuing to trade with them would have only sullied our relations with them, not to mention that our main trading routes over land go through Kiraja and Matahari. For those reasons, our nation previously withdrew trade from the Empire, and it is the intention of the Concilium to continue our current course of action. Now, I leave the floor to you, Your Highness. I hope you have some very incontestable points to challenge our beliefs, or else I am afraid you have made this journey for little to no reason. Thank you for that very riveting introduction to discussion, Countess. As previously stated, I am here on behalf of my sister and my brother-in-law. They are interested in conducting trade with the Kingdom of Drachenfrey, and extending good faith towards you, Your Majesty.
Good faith. Everyone throughout Unterram knows that the sole interest of the Empire is to instill war wherever they go.
I understand your disbelief, Count Vogel, but I would like to remind you that the Balian Empire has been living in peace with the rest of the continent for nearly a decade now. And all of the issues we previously had with the nation of Kiraja'an Matahari has been reconciled through treaty. Currently, trade between our two nations is flourishing, and this is what Balia is interested in extending to all of you.
10 years is nothing in consideration of the long history of endless battle your people continue to indulge in. What do you expect us to do? Supply you with iron ore to reinforce your armies with? Next thing we know, this empress of yours will be pushing to take over the entire continent. Your Majesty, you cannot seriously consider this proposed trade agreement.
Please, Count Vogel. I am not finished going through my proposal.
What more is there to say? Anyone in their right mind can tell what the Empire is after. Metals. Weapons. Perhaps this decade-long period of peace is finally coming to an end. Whom will you be attacking first, I wonder?
Count Vogel, that question is extremely out of line. I have already told you that the Empire seeks a peaceful future, for it is in peace that we will finally be able to prosper and give our citizens the future they deserve. I intended to mention to His Majesty that in return the Empire will be able to supply Drachenfrey with multiple resources, such as copper and silver. Along with that, we have an extensive array of spice industries ready to sell to the western portions of Unterram, not to mention the common interest in gold. The Empire has a filled treasury, and our people are now going through a golden age. I am sure that in itself will interest you. I see. I regret to inform you we aren't lacking in any of those areas, except for when it comes to spices. And spices are a luxury, not a necessity.
Precisely, Countess. I'm afraid the princess here has wasted not only her time, but ours, collectively, for this thoughtless trade proposal.
Count Vogel, you and the Countess alone do not speak for the entirety of the Concilium, and you certainly do not speak for His Majesty. I will wait for him to address me first before I listen to your conclusions.
Princess Althea! I am tired of these replies where you intricately weave in your sharp words. We have no need for this thoughtless trade agreement. The Concilium must be united on this front. You all cannot seriously be considering this deal. We gain little in comparison to what they will.
Quite the alternative, Count Vogel. I am well aware that Drachenfrey's previous policy of hiding away from the majority of the eastern portions of Unterram has been harder on the kingdom's treasury. You need the money, unless you wish to crumble. So I would be delighted if you would simply drop this front of being far more well off than you actually are.
How did you obtain this information?
Not in a nefarious way, if that's what you were thinking. I simply overheard from an acquaintance. I am a princessa, Count Vogel. I have friends all over Unterram, and we discuss politics with one another. So, now that everything's been laid out in the open, what is your conclusion, Your Majesty?
Your Majesty, you cannot!
Thank you, Your Majesty. I assure you that you will not regret this agreement. I will have the trade routes laid out at another meeting if that is all right with you and the Concilium. All right, then. I suppose this concludes our discussion for today.
Then I'm considering this conference over. I will be taking my leave now. Your Majesty. Your Highness.
And then there were only two. I must say, Your Majesty, I despise this Concilium of yours, though the majority of them despise me in return. Count Kalmar is the only exception. He's been relatively hospitable to me. He's a friend of yours, is he not? I thought so. I visited his temporary place of residence here in the capital yesterday. We had a brief discussion on trade routes via sea in preparation for the outcome in which you agreed to our conditions. Count Kalmar told me there was little chance that you would refuse the offer. He said, and I quote, "Right now that man would jump for joy at just about any chance to piss off the Concilium. Hell, he might even shoot an arrow into one of the walls in the middle of one of Countess Althea's dances." It was his words, not mine, Your Majesty. Now that the majority of my work is done, what would you suggest I do in my leisure time? Well, one would think that, with you being the king, you would know what someone should do in Drachenfrey for fun, or entertainment. So far, all I've done is call on differing lords and ladies for tea and political talk. Even though I do enjoy it from time to time, I am utterly drained after all of this. Any suggestions? Castle gardens? No, I haven't walked through them yet. I have to confess, Your Majesty, I didn't expect you to be the type for flowers. No, it's not a bad thing, not at all. In fact, I invite you to join me in 2 days from now. If you manage to gain any free time, I'll be in the gardens that afternoon. I would enjoy the company if you were interested. Besides, I know so very little about Drachenfrey and flowers. Maybe you could assist me. If you end up being too busy, then it is no problem at all. I just think I would like the chance to get to know you better, Your Majesty. And with that, I will leave you to your business. Have a good day, Your Majesty. I am curious to see if you'll be able to meet with me amongst the flowers.